If you want your favorite candidate to win the White House, it's all about the delegates. And today we're going to learn how a candidate actually gets enough delegates to win the nomination. We've got just the person to help us out. Elaine Kamarck is senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and author of a few books on primary elections. She's also been a member of the DNC Rules Committee for over 20 years. So I want to thank you, Elaine, for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
It's good. So let's just start at the basics. How does a candidate get to be nominated President of the United States at the Democratic Convention?
A candidate has to win a majority of delegates to the convention, Democratic or Republican. And by the way, there's a lot of similarities between the two parties on this. Now, what's different from previous years, from say the 1950s, is that the delegates get awarded to candidates on the basis of primaries. It used to be that there were very few primaries, and even the ones there were didn't really mean much. They were just what we called beauty contests. But these days, if you win 40% of the vote in Ohio, you get approximately 40% of the delegates from Ohio. So that's why the primaries are important, because they allocate the actual delegate slots.
So you just mentioned 40% of the vote might get you 40% roughly of the delegates. Democrats have proportionality in their delegate count, not winner take all in most places, right?
Right, and Republicans have a mix. Republicans have some states that are winner take all, where if you win the primary, you get all the delegates. But a lot of Republican states these days have something that's more like winner take all by congressional district. So if you get a lot of votes in a congressional district, sometimes you can win all the delegates from that district. That's not the case for the Democrats. Democrats, it's proportional everywhere with a 15% threshold, which means that if you're a candidate and you don't get 15% of the vote, you're not entitled to a delegate.
Okay, so explain to us now the difference between a caucus and a primary.
Well, the first thing to know is that in 2020, there will be very few caucuses. And the difference is the following. In a caucus, you, the voter, have to come to a meeting. It's at a certain time of day, and you have to participate in essentially a meeting about who you're going to be for. And there are speeches, and there's interaction between the groups, etc. And then that caucus elects delegates usually to another convention, which elects delegates to another convention, and finally they elect delegates to the national convention.
So it's complicated.
It's complicated. Primaries are just like elections, you know. You can vote before you bring the kids to school. You can vote on your way back from work. It's a much different system, and you get a lot higher participation in primaries for obvious reasons.
But there's some places where it's mixed, right? I remember when Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama ran against each other in 2008. In the Nevada caucus, Hillary Clinton actually won the primary vote, but Barack Obama got more delegates out of the state. How did something like that happen?
Well, something like that happens because of the way candidates move votes around as they're negotiating within those caucuses.
Okay.
So it's a complicated thing. This time we've made it a little bit simpler on the Democratic side, which is everybody who comes in is going to be recorded as to presidential preference, and then the eventual national convention delegates will have to be awarded according to that initial preference. And so we've kind of gotten rid of that confusion.
But what happens if you get less than 15% of the vote? Let's say you're candidate X. I won't name somebody because everybody has a shot. But you're a candidate who gets 3 or 4% of the vote, where a lot of candidates are polling.
Yeah.
Do the people who show up to caucus for you still have the opportunity to move to another candidate in their second choice?
Yes, they do. So people who say you're getting 4% of the vote, they'll do the initial count, and then they'll say, okay, you guys didn't reach the 15% threshold. You can go join another caucus. And then there's lots of discussion and bargaining and laughter and yelling and whatever.
You know, the thing is, it's complicated, but when you watch it happen, it's actually pretty fun.
It's pretty cool. I mean, you know, one of the reasons that caucuses hang on is that it's a very engaged form of democracy.
Yeah.
Unlike, you know, just stopping by after you went to the grocery store and casting your vote. This is, you got to really get in there and you got to really think about it and interact with your fellow citizens, et cetera. So there is something to be said for caucus states.
All right, one other thing that's happened in this election is the calendar has moved around a little bit. Mm-hmm. So now we see something happening like California, Texas, there's another state I think, that are doing mail-in ballots. And those mail-in ballots are going out the same day as the Iowa caucus. So candidates have a tougher time here because they've got to be in a bunch of places at the same time, right?
They do, and for long shot candidates, it's particularly tough because long shot candidates used to base a campaign on doing really well in the early states, and then by the time 2 or 3 weeks passed and you got to the big states, everybody would know who they are. Yeah. Right? And they would get the advantage of what we call momentum. So it used to be that long shot candidates could get momentum in Iowa, get momentum in New Hampshire, and then go into some big states. They can still do that. That'll still happen, but it's a little bit more difficult because if you're a long shot candidate, even before the Iowa caucuses, it's not clear that a lot of people are going to vote for you.
Now, there's another topic that always causes a lot of concern and questions. People have been asking about it, and it particularly got hot and heavy in the last campaign in 2016. That is when people talk about superdelegates.
Right.
Right? And there's an idea about superdelegates and how undemocratic they may or may not be. Tell us the difference between a pledged delegate and, I guess formally it's an unpledged delegate, but a pledged delegate and a superdelegate.
Well, the basic difference is that the pledged delegate is supposed to vote for the person they were elected to vote for. Now, I want to put a wrinkle in here, which is not well understood. The actual rule says that delegates shall, in all good conscience, vote for the person they were elected to represent. So when a delegate gets to the floor of the convention, if your candidate the week before has had some terrible scandal, okay, you may just go to the floor of the convention and say, in all good conscience, I'm switching my vote. And nobody can do anything about it. Okay, so in a fundamental sense, everybody is unpledged. Okay, the difference, of course, between the unpledged and the the unpledged and the pledged is that the superdelegates don't have to declare a presidential preference. They simply go to the convention by virtue of the office they hold.
So how do they get chosen? How's the superdelegate?
They're not chosen, it's by their office. So if you are a member of Congress, if you're a United States Senator, if you're a governor, if you're a member of the Democratic National Committee, and you hold that office, you are automatically a delegate.
But aren't there some people who are superdelegates who are none of those things?
No. No. I mean, the only ones who are none of those things are former presidents of the United States. You know, everybody kind of thought that maybe Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton ought to be able to go to the convention, right? Former presidents of the United States, former party chairman. There's a handful of people, but no. And the important thing about them is that it goes with the office. So if you're a member of Congress and you resign, you know, 6 months before the convention, you don't go to the convention. The person who takes your place, if there's a special election or something, goes to the convention, but you don't go. So it is about the office. And what it is the superdelegate structure is a recognition that the party is composed of many pieces.
Now, how did the superdelegates change after the 2016 campaign? There was a lot of noise about this in the Rules Committee for the Democratic Party after the Bernie versus Hillary fight.
It changed as follows, that superdelegates will no longer have a first ballot vote. They will only have a vote if it goes to the second ballot. Okay. And the fear was that a block of superdelegates, there's usually somewhere in the neighborhood of about 700, about 15% of the...
So how many total delegates are there?
Total delegates is about 4,000.
4,000.
And so there usually was about 700 superdelegates. If Democrats do really well in a midterm, they get more there's more or less, whatever. So,
how many delegates do you need to be nominated?
So you need 50% plus one, so you need 2,000 and some. There's about, say there's 700, 750 superdelegates. The fear among Bernie Sanders supporters was that they would be very close among the pledged delegates, and then all the superdelegates would give the nomination to Hillary Clinton, because they were heavily in favor of Hillary Clinton.
Oh, but this is interesting, though. So what you just said is you need 50% plus one. Mm-hmm. So that means, we've got 400 people running for president.
Yeah.
right now.
Right.
Okay, literally 20 or ish. So if, let's say, 10 of them make it to the convention with delegates, somebody can't just win with 47% of the delegates.
No, they've got to.
So is that the place where the second ballot would kick in?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. If nobody has a first ballot nomination, they will go to a second ballot. And this used to routinely happen, by the way, in both political parties. It just doesn't happen very much in the modern era. But yeah, you'll go to a second ballot. At that point, a new set of voters comes in, and that's the superdelegates. And the thought was there that superdelegates should not have the power to overturn what the voters did. However, if the voters basically don't decide, right, if they offer up a split verdict, as is possible, then the people who have also have an interest in the party in the election and in governing, so that's the governors and the Congress and the party officials, then they should have a say at that point.
Interesting. So how do you see this first set of contests taking place between, we go from New Hampshire to Iowa?
No, Iowa to New Hampshire.
Iowa first. Iowa the caucus.
Iowa first, yeah.
And then New Hampshire, and then Nevada and South Carolina.
Right.
Those states, that's a new construct that was put together about 10 years ago to group those 4 states together.
Right.
And what was the thinking behind having those particular 4 states go as a group?
The thinking was that Iowa and New Hampshire were primarily white states. And the Democratic Party, especially, this arose in the Democratic side. In the Democratic Party, our core constituency is African American and increasingly Latino. So the idea was that we should get a state with a large African American community, that's South Carolina, and that we should get a state that was a large Latino community, that's Nevada. It also gave us a southern and a western balance. Interestingly enough, in this era when Democrats and Republicans don't agree on anything, Jim Roosevelt, the chair of the Rules Committee, Roosevelt's grandson, got together with the Republicans, and in fact the Republicans now do the same thing as the Democrats. And this is actually good for the system, right? Because you don't want to have a state having a really wonderful, exciting Democratic contest and the Republicans left out of it, or vice versa, right? So now all 4 states in both political parties get to lead off. And then come a lot of the big states.
So one more question about this. The Democratic Party is a private institution.
Yes, it is.
When the party holds an election, who pays? Is it a state function to deal with that, or does the Democratic Party have to be responsible for this particular election?
It varies. Some states have laws on the books to pay for primaries in both parties, okay? And usually, most primaries are paid for by the government, and it's equal between both parties. When there are caucuses or another kind of thing called party-run primaries, the state parties pay for it. Okay, so but it's the bigger issue here.
So that's the incentive to do both nominating events on the same day.
Yeah,
is it saves people money too.
Oh yeah, no, and actually most state laws don't let you have a Republican on one day and a Democratic on the other day. I mean, it's too much money and too much confusion. But the bigger issue you raise is quite interesting. political parties in our system hold a kind of funny place in between the public and the private. The Supreme Court has routinely said that the parties are protected by First Amendment right of free association. In other words, anybody can you can form a political party, anybody can join, there's no constraints on which party you can join or not. The only time the court has interfered in party in a substantive way was in what was called the white primaries in Texas, where because Texas, way back when, we're talking about the 40s, was a totally Democratic state, they didn't allow African Americans to vote in the Democratic primary. The problem was that the Democratic primary was tantamount to election. So therefore, that became a civil rights violation. That became a 14th Amendment violation. So, you know, there are times when the courts have intervened in parties, but most of the time, if a party wants to have a winner-take-all system, the court doesn't care. If the party wants to have a proportional system with a 30% threshold, the courts don't care. So the parties have a broad latitude to structure their nomination systems the way they want to.
And I just think of one more thing. Someone like Bernie Sanders, who is a political independent in his professional, non-presidential life, decides to run for president as a Democrat. Is there any requirement for any candidate to say that they are a member of the party, to do anything, to sign anything? Or can anybody run for the party nomination just by declaring themselves a candidate?
Just this time, sort of in response to Bernie Sanders, the Democratic Party required their candidates to sign a pledge saying, I'm a Democrat, I agree with the principles of the Democratic Party, I will support the nominee of the Democratic Party, and a couple other things. So there is a pledge. I think it brings up, though, another issue, which is we're in a day and age when a lot of people are running for president not to be president. They're running for president to sell their books. They're running for president to get an anchor slot on CNN or Fox. You know, they're running for president for all sorts of other reasons. I think at some point the parties are going to have to get up the nerve to say to people, no, we really actually don't think you are qualified to be president and you shouldn't be running for president. Because we're seeing that, we saw it happen in the Republican side, we're seeing it happen on the Democratic side.
Well, the party has done something in this election that feels like it's going that way. The party has said, you know, you have to reach a threshold in order to participate in debates. That seems to be a sifting mechanism that not everybody is very happy about, but it's cut the number down pretty significantly.
It has worked, but the problem is that it kept out people who, in fact, had solid backgrounds in government and solid backgrounds of achievement in government, and it kept in people who frankly were laughable as presidential candidates or as putative presidents. So that's the problem with that, is that it's kind of the celebrity approach to president. And let's face it, we love our celebrities, we love our movie stars, but not every movie star is capable of being president of the United States.
Tell that to Ronald Reagan.
Yeah. Well, and I want to defend Ronald Reagan. Everybody says that about Ronald Reagan. He was a two-term governor of the biggest state in the Union.
That is true.
He knew a little bit about government.
It's true. Elaine Kamarck, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jamal.
We'll see you again next time.
Okay.
Thanks for watching Hill TV on YouTube. Be sure to click subscribe and hit the bell so you know when we post new videos. And head to thehill.com for all the latest political news.